Good morning and welcome to Morning Java. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined with Dave Molinari. But before we get started, we're sponsored by our good friends at Get-Go Cafe and Market, which, by the way, in times like now where some people are uncertain about getting out of their car, they have curbside pickup. All you got to do is order on the app, go pick up your food. Easy as pie. So, Dave, we're talking Penguins here today. I want to start off talking about the qualifying round. The Pittsburgh Penguins are getting ready to play the Montreal Canadiens at some point. We're not sure when those dates are. But when they do, I wanted to ask you, who is the biggest threat to the Penguins that's not named Carey Price? Because everyone knows Carey Price. Everyone knows that he's one of the best goalies in the world. Is there anyone that pops off the page in terms of the roster that you're like, boy, they need to watch out for this one particular player?
Well, there really isn't an individual who stands out. Thomas Tatar, forward, is a pretty fair goal scorer. Brendan Gallagher can score goals, and he's a pretty good agitator. Shea Weber, the defenseman, has one of the most powerful shots in the league. But in general, there really isn't an individual that I think the Penguins have to worry about contending with other than Carey Price. But there are a couple of qualities the Canadiens have that will certainly get the Penguins' attention as they prepare for the series. Montreal has pretty good team speed. Their coach, Claude Julien, has installed very good structure. Montreal can play pretty good defense. Of course, it helps to have a goaltender like Carey Price as your final line of defense. But if Montreal would carry through with its commitment to playing well in its own end, it could pose some challenges for the Penguins.
You bring up team speed, and this is something that the Penguins used to win Stanley Cups in the past. Do you feel that this current defensive unit or the forwards that are playing two ways struggle, maybe in particular with teams that are really fast, that can put them on their heels? Do you find that that's an issue with the Penguins, or do they handle that type of team very well?
Yeah, I don't think it gives them any more trouble than it would give any other team. I mean,
Okay.
speed in general. The Penguins certainly didn't pioneer the concept, but their success in Stanley Cups a few years ago really put a spotlight on it, and more teams seem to emphasize that in personnel, in part because it can be a challenge to contain it. But I don't know that the Penguins have any more trouble with it than any other club does.
So, in other words, you're saying that the Canadiens as a team, not necessarily as individuals, pose the biggest threat outside of the fact that they have one of the greatest goaltenders in the world?
Yeah, that's safe to say. I mean, I do not expect any other individual other than Carey Price to play a headline role in stealing the series from the Penguins.
All right, Dave. So the second topic we're going to discuss today is actually something that I didn't know much about until we spoke prior to the show, and that was that there's a CBA agreement, or they're trying to reach an agreement on a new 4-year collective bargaining agreement, the NHL and the Players Association, and they're trying to set a frozen cap at $81.5 million. Now, before we get started, explain what this projection is for those that don't know in regards to what is a frozen cap. And you even said that it's not even linked to revenue projections, which is strange to me. Why don't you go and explain that first?
Well, normally, which nothing is normal anymore, the NHL salary cap is tied to something called hockey-related revenues, or revenue, which is the money that teams generate through ticket sales, broadcast rights, and that sort of thing. Under the proposal that has been worked out but is not finalized yet, the salary cap would remain at $81.5 million, at least for next season. That's the figure it was at for this season. That's why the talk is of the cap being frozen. That's not really a style of cap or anything like that. It's simply a tentative agreement between the parties to keep the cap ceiling where it is this season, just so that the precipitous drop in revenue that was brought about by the coronavirus pandemic doesn't completely blow up the game's finances.
Okay, so let's say that this gets passed and that this is the number, and we know what it's going to be at least for 2020 the 2021 season next year. What does this mean for the Pittsburgh Penguins in regards to their salary cap situation? Are they bellied up to the salary cap like the Pittsburgh Steelers always are, or do they have some wiggle room in terms of maybe bringing in some new players? What are the Penguins looking like in regards to this new cap situation?
Well, as of right now, the Penguins have about $62 million committed in salaries to players for next season, which means they would have under 20 million to re-sign all of their free agents that they would like to bring back. The headliners in that group are the two goalies, Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry, both of whom are restricted free agents, which means that in theory, the Penguins should be able to keep them. But from a practical standpoint, even if the cap had gone up a bit, and even if the two guys had agreed that they could live with sharing the job, which seems unlikely because I think they both see themselves as number one goalies, it's not realistic for the Penguins to think that if the cap ceiling stays at 81.5 million, that they would be able to bring back both. And they probably would have to let some other restricted guys that they would be interested in keeping walk, or if they're really committed to keeping those guys, that they would have to trade some players who are under contract maybe for a bit longer than just next season to free up the cap space to keep their RFAs.
Let me ask you this about the goalies, because this is such a unique situation for me as an outsider's layman's perspective. This playoff, whether it's just a qualifying round or whether it's a deep run into the postseason, boy, it could have an impact on these negotiations. I mean, when you think about it, because everyone's assuming, you've said it on my podcast, the PM podcast on DK Pittsburgh Sports Radio, that you think it's Matt Murray's job to lose. And I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But where would that put in terms of Jarry's value? I mean, he had a lot of playing time this season, but how do you think if Murray stumbles in the postseason, would they be able to keep them in a reasonable situation, or do you definitely think that one of them is gone?
I think that they're both in line for significant raises, particularly Tristan Jarry, who's still on what's called an entry-level contract. He's not making very much at all. And given the season that he's had, I think he's in for a really hefty raise. Matt Murray's already making pretty good money, but he has a couple of Stanley Cup rings to his credit already. It's not inconceivable that he would add a third this summer. And I mean, if that would happen, that would just drive his value, his asking price through the roof. So no, it's for a variety of reasons. It's pretty difficult to see both of them coming back next year, especially when they already have a capable backup in Casey DeSmith in their system, and he's under contract for next season. So they have cost certainty with him. It's just hard to see them spending the money it would take to bring back their two goalies from this season.
Yeah, I mean, the salary cap is the salary cap, and the Penguins are going to have to maneuver around it as best as they can entering next season. All right, Dave, last segment here. You know, this coronavirus pandemic has thrown a wrench into everything that we used to call normal, and that's including the sports world. You have a baseball season that has gone from 162 games down to 60. You have NFL is already starting to make some adjustments for their upcoming season. And the NHL had to cut their season a little bit short, and now they have these new modified playoffs with round robins and qualifying rounds, and it's different. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just different. And there's a lot of people out there, and I'm not saying I'm one of them, that think that whomever wins this Stanley Cup or this World Series championship should have an asterisk next to that year, meaning, yeah, they won it, but it wasn't a typical year. Now, in terms of hockey, do you agree with that?
Well, if you want to put an asterisk on it because it was not a typical year, I think you should maybe put a half dozen asterisks on it because
Very
this is
true.
the strangest turn of events that I think we've had in anybody's lifetime in the NHL. But if the idea is to somehow downplay the accomplishment, then I could not disagree more with that concept. Most teams played 70, 71 games. So they got all within about a dozen of completing a regular season. And it's entirely possible that the team that would go on to win the Stanley Cup would have to win 19 games, not the usual 16, because of the qualifying round in which 16 teams will participate before the official playoffs begin. So you could certainly make a case that winning this year could be even more difficult than it is in a typical season. Certainly, it will be a playoff unlike any that we've ever seen, and hopefully unlike any that we will ever see again, with games being played in just one or two cities and no fans, and just a lot of circumstances that have been dictated by the pandemic. But I think that any team that manages to be the last one standing when this finally ends will have accomplished something very special and will deserve all the recognition that goes with being a champion.
You know, the crazy thing is you talk about circumstances, how different and unique, and you hope that this never happens again. And I think we can all agree with that sentiment. But if there's a silver lining in this cloud, especially for the Penguins, no one ever thought Jay Gensel was going to be able to play again this year. And now all of a sudden, their forward lines are pretty loaded when you look at the acquisitions they made with Zucker and Marleau. Do you think that plays into this whole, asterisk, not asterisk, but uniqueness of this season in regards to all the NHL teams should be healthy, barring someone having a season-ending surgery, just like Nick Bukestad and Simone had?
Yeah, that's. I was going to say everybody should be completely healthy, except of course the Penguins. Who, but no, there are a number of players around the league whose participation in the playoffs was iffy at best. Had things proceeded on schedule, but now we'll be back, and presumably we'll be at full strength when the playoffs begin. The example that comes immediately into mind is Seth Jones, the defenseman in Columbus, who can be a real difference maker when he's on his game. It certainly looked like the Blue Jackets, if they qualified for the playoffs, were going to be without him. But now he's healthy and ready to go, and there are quite a few players around the league who will get a shot at the playoffs that didn't seem possible just a few months ago.
Hey, it's different, but different doesn't always mean bad.